This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Good afternoon. I'm Rosemary McGee, and I'm director of Emory's Manuscript Archive and Rare Book Library. It's my pleasure and privilege to welcome all gathered here, the readers, the writers, the scholars, the students, the teachers, the poets. We live in an age where it's easy to be consumed by the immediate and commonplace. Poetry calls upon us to transcend other preoccupations on a Saturday afternoon, allowing us to move into the realm of the transcendent. For Emory University, poetry sits at the heart of what we do, at the academic, experiential, geographic center, with our acclaimed faculty, extraordinary students, and outstanding collections. Of course, collections do not just arrive of their own accord. There are poets, collectors, archivists, and curators, those who care for this special realm, guardians of the transcendent. Among the collections here are the papers and poems of Paul Muldoon, who honors us with his presence today as part of our many poetry festivities this weekend. Kevin Young, curator of literary collections, as well as the Raymond Danowski Poetry Library, will introduce our special guest poet, but Kevin deserves his own commentary. He is the Atticus Haygood Professor of Creative Writing in English, so someone who knows deeply about the multiple dimensions of creating and nurturing poetry. He is, as well, the award-winning author of at least 7 books of poetry and editor of 7 other collections, including, most recently, the Gray Album on the Blackness of Blackness. He writes on music, food, grief, race, and love, all the topics that sustain and concern us. His newest volume of poetry, to be out on March the 4th, Book of Hours, has already been named one of the essential poetry titles for 2014 and referenced in the American Scholar as a compact daybook of grief. Young acknowledges and fully experiences life's passages from birth to death and to all that happens in between and beyond. Since poetry is all about the intersection of language and the inner life, along with a curating of those traditions, there's no better person to introduce both this poetry reading and our special guests than my colleague, Kevin Young.
It's a pleasure being here, and thank you so much for that introduction. It's a pleasure today to introduce Paul Muldoon, poetry editor of The New Yorker, Howard G.B. Clark 21 University Professor in the Humanities at Princeton University, and 2003 Pulitzer Prize winner in poetry. Muldoon's reading this afternoon kicks off the 2014 season of the Raymond Danowski Poetry Library Reading Series, now in its 9th year. It is also the 10th anniversary of the transformative Danowski Poetry Library's arrival at Emory. You could say Muldoon is kicking off a spring of Pulitzer poets with 2012 winner Tracy K. Smith coming for the creative writing program March 5th and 6th, and the 2013 Pulitzer winner Sharon Olds finishing the Danowski reading series for this season on 20th of March. She's reading in the Schwartz Center here on campus. Please join us for that event, which, like all our events, is free and open to the public. The Danowski Poetry Library reading series couldn't happen with the support of the Hightower Family Fund, Marble, Creative Writing, and a host of individuals who make all this possible. Thanks to them, and thanks to you for coming out today. I also want to thank you for your support to help keep these readings free to the public. Please purchase the beautiful broadside with a new poem by Paul Muldoon, printed especially for the occasion. These are really unique pieces of art printed by hand, which Paul will be happy to sign along with books after the reading, but also consider supporting the reading series with a donation. Every little bit counts. But where was I? Oh yes, Paul Muldoon. The question, where was I, is one that you might encounter in Muldoon's work, which transports us from the ordinary into not just the extraordinary, but also the specialness of the overlooked, the unseen that is found in the everyday. Mules, hay, moist sand and gravel, maggot. The titles of his many books measure things supposedly small but iconic. His title, Horse Latitudes, refers to the area around the equator, where ships sometimes stall. His Quouf, one of my favorite of his great titles, refers to, quote, the family word for the hot water bottle. It is this province of the particular that is Muldoon's real realm, the place where he manages to not only make language, but discover it anew, set it carefully in form and rhyme before letting it fly or parading it past. The poem in Muldoon is a place of pleasure, which is not to say of ease. It is a sophisticated yet sating experience, like a great meal, but also like a great landscape you can get lost in. Some of these landscapes appear on the beautiful covers of his books. It has sweep and scope and deep woods and often staggering vistas. And then we come to a clearing. It is this clearing that I want to talk more about. This clearing, Muldoon's Met realm, is sonic as much as anything. It may be one reason why he has devoted so much toward the opera, libretti, I should say, and the lyric, what his long work Maddock calls a mystery, to experience poems as song and drama. His latest book, The Word on the Street, can be read as rock lyrics, but by a lyricist as equally aware of the ancient lyre and the origins of poetry as he is in tune with his now fellow Jersey boy, Bruce Springsteen. Muldoon's a go-to guy. When you hit those speed bumps, when you need another stock to buy, when you need another trade to ply, when you need another stitch to tie, I'm your go-to guy. Muldoon here resembles the English Auden, that era when W.H. Auden embraced song, cabaret, and even the blues to give voice to some of his most enduring lyrics. Like Auden, Muldoon too has spanned the Atlantic, residing in the U.S. since 1987, after being born in County Armagh, Northern Ireland, educated at Queen's University of Belfast, and being associated with the Belfast group of poets, including Seamus Heaney, whose exhibition I hope you'll join us at after, Kieran Carson, and others whose archives we are proud to house here at Emory. But Muldoon resembles Auden too, and his facility with form, and his ability to make powerful, punchy short poems, as well as his mastery over the long form, whether it's his big, beautiful elegy in cantata or the Bangle, Slight Return. Muldoon's Protean wit, his Joycean play, his Beckettian second tongues, whether that means Celtic or American English, poems or songs, also mark him as a quintessential Irish writer, which is to say a writer of the world before us, of change and triumph, of the past, what he calls the end of the poem, but also the future. Take the opening of his lines for the centenary of the birth of Samuel Beckett. Only now do we see how each crossroads was bound to throw up not just a cross, but a couple of gadabouts with goads, a couple of gadabouts at a loss as to why they were at the beck and call of some old crock soaring about the culch of a kitchen midden at evenfall, some old crock roaring across the gulch. Muldoon's songs and sonnets, of which that was one, his operas and epics form kinds of wayward shrines to life in our experience of it in language. Indeed, Muldoon offers us a second life, one where the poem and the poet are not at the end of the poem, but at the beginning. Reading him, we too experience life through language, not as a side project, as one terrific poem has it, but essential to life's mysteries. Language as a, quote, extraordinary rendition, that is Muldoon's and Muldoon's alone, which it just so happens makes it all of ours. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Muldoon.
Are you guys coming down here? Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. You know, I think it can only be downhill after that, but we'll do our best. I thought I'd read a few poems from over the years, beginning in fact with the title poem of a book from 1980. It's a poem about a character who disappears very suddenly off the face of the earth. And it began, I'm pretty sure, with a photograph of a pair of horses standing out in the middle of a field that was half plowed. There's a word I use here, rig, which is a version of the word ridge or furrow. So the two horses standing there attached to the plow, nothing else to be seen. So in some sense I try to construct a narrative as to for what might have happened. Why Brownlee left and where he went is a mystery even now. For if a man should have been content, it was him. 2 acres of barley, 1 of potatoes, 4 bullocks, a milker, a slated farmhouse. He was last seen going out to plough on a March morning, bright and early. By noon, Brownlee was famous. They had found all abandoned, with the last rig unbroken, his pair of black horses, like man and wife, shifting their weight from foot to foot and gazing into the future. I read a couple of poems set in the area in County Armagh, which Kevin mentioned. The Armagh-Tyrone border, about halfway across Northern Ireland, where I was brought up. And this first one is set, not unreasonably perhaps. Is this a church? It is, isn't it? Yeah, I'm just checking. You know, one forgets. And so this next one is set in, for the most part, in this very small church that we attended, a Catholic church. And it's a poem that's set at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when, as some of you will recall, there was a sense that the end of the world was at hand, that this was it coming up. And in our case, everyone round about, including ourselves, we were, 10, 11, 12, something at the time, we were marched down to the church and we lined up for the confessional so that we would get our slates clean, as it were, and our stories straight as we went to meet our Maker, as we almost certainly would in the next couple of days. Anyway, so this is a poem having to do with that. Cuba. My eldest sister arrived home that morning in her white muslin evening dress. Who the hell do you think you are? Running out to dances in next to nothing, as though we hadn't enough bother with the world at war, if not at an end. It's okay, it's funny. My father was pounding the breakfast table. Those Yankees were touch and go as it was. If you'd heard Patton in Armagh, but this Kennedy's nearly an Irishman, so he's not much better than ourselves. And him with only to say the word. If you've got anything on your mind, maybe you should make your peace with God. I could hear May from beyond the curtain. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I told a lie once. I was disobedient once. And Father, a boy touched me once. Tell me, child, was this touch immodest? Did he touch your breast, for example? He brushed against me, Father, very gently. This next one is set in the poem where I went to school, in the school which I attended. Did I say the poem where I went to school? No. The school I attended, and I did attend the school, I want you to know, largely because my mother was one of the school teachers. And when she went out in the morning, she took me by the scruff of the neck and brought me with her. But there were people in the vicinity who had clearly made other arrangements and very, very rarely showed up. This is a poem about one of them, about his life then and more recently. His name, at least the first part of his name, you'll recognize: Joseph Mary Plunkett, great Irish poet and patriot who took part in the 1916 Rising in Dublin and was shot for his part in it. So, I mean, for better or worse, with his name comes a kind of a certain freight. As it turns out, he is a militant Republican, as they call them. And so this is an attempt to try to make some sense of aspects of his life. Anshaw. When the master was calling the roll at the primary school in College Lands, you were meant to call back Anshaw and raise your hand as your name occurred. Anshaw meaning here and now, all present and correct, was the first word of Irish I spoke. The last name on the ledger belonged to Joseph Mary Plunkett Ward and was followed, as often as not, by silence, knowing looks, a nod and a wink, the master's droll, and where's our little ward of court? I remember the first time he came back, the master had sent him out along the hedges to weigh up for himself and cut a stick with which he would be beaten. After a while, nothing was spoken. He would arrive as a matter of course with an ash plant, a sally rod, or finally the hazel wand he had whittled down to a whiplash. Its twist of red and yellow lacquers, sanded and polished, and altogether so delicately wrought that he had engraved his initials on it. I last met Joseph Mary Plunkett Ward in a pub just over the Irish border. He was living in the open, in a secret camp on the other side of the mountain. He was fighting for Ireland, making things happen. And he told me, Joe Ward, of how he had risen through the ranks to quartermaster, commandant. How every morning at parade, his volunteers would call back Anshaw and raise their hands as their names occurred. So this next one is a newish poem. Is that okay for you? Is the microphone working okay for you? Is it coming and going a little bit? It's all right. I'm going to give this lady some water. Yeah. There you go. Pass it. Yeah, not at all. So this is a poem called The Firing Squad, and it actually picks up from that last one. I often, when I give a poetry reading, really make it up as I go along, if you know what I mean. And it sort of keeps me there, keeps me present, sort of. And but I felt on this occasion, because I'm so thrilled to be here at Emory, which I consider to be a home for me, that I actually went to the trouble of organizing the reading. And I just want you to know that there's actually a kind of argument to it, though I don't want you to ask me at the end what it was. Anyway, so Joseph Mary Plunkett, the aforementioned, features in this poem too. And indeed he's quoted something he said on the last night of his life, which was May 4th, 1916, just before he was shot. And he said, "I am very happy I am dying for the glory of God and the honor of Ireland." And oddly enough, on that same day, May 4th, 1916, Robert Frost wrote a letter to Louis Untermeyer in which he stated this: "I am going to tell you something I never but once let out of the bag before. And that was just after I reached London and before I had begun to value myself for what I was worth. It is a very damaging secret, and you may not thank me for taking you into it when I tell you I have often wished I could be sure that the other sharer of it had perished in the war. It is this: the poet in me died nearly 10 years ago." So this is the firing squad. Something I never but once let on is that I am as ready to be hanged, drawn, and quartered as the blessed Oliver, as ready as his sober-suited descendant, Joseph Mary Plunkett, to be shot. All the more so if I've married my beloved Grace only hours before. Like many of my race, I've come to see English plantain as a flat-footed weed terminating in an oblongoid spike of flowers, like the head of a mess. It tends to establish itself in the least likely place, exercising a feudal droit de seigneur on pavements, parking lots, where battery acid and diesel have bled into the soil, drive-ins where we're wooed by and wed to the whole kit and caboodle of empire. As for a priest or padre laying about him with his holy water sprinkler, it has me see red no less than if he wielded a flint axe head made by an old-style flint knapper. That's why I get up from my pillow, filled, as it happens, with buckwheat, to set my face against the dawn. As I stride out now across the Institute lawn, I look all the more dapper for the white handkerchief so firmly lodged in my breast pocket. The one thing I hadn't expected to be doing was reading a little song lyric, though I came prepared for anything, as you can see. But I'm going to read that lyric that Kevin mentioned in his lovely introduction. Go-to guy. If you've spent the housekeeping, I'm guilty by default. If my wounds are weeping, they're crying out for salt. I'm your sugar daddy when the Dow slumps, your 89 caddy when you hit those speed bumps. When you need another stock to buy, when you need another trade to ply, when you need another stitch to tie, I'm your go-to guy. If your horses are restive, it's because of my horseplay. If my mood is festive, it's because you carried the day. Last night in the E-Quad with the mechanical mugwumps at Starbucks or Pequod, where you manned the pumps. When you need another sock in the eye, when you need another fish to fry, when you need a first mate to say I'm your go-to guy. I. Though I bring home the bacon, you're still high on the hog. If I feel forsaken, it's not that you've lain with a dog. I'm your Elizabeth Bowen when the cat jumps. I'm your Leonard Cohen when you're down in the dumps. When you need another lock to pry, when you need another kite to fly, when you need another hope to die, I'm your go-to guy. That's so downbeat. It's dreadful. Yes. No wonder that wasn't part of the plan. So, a couple more set back there in Northern Ireland, the north of Ireland, whatever we call it these days. We're still working on that. This is a poem having to do with a roundabout, which turns out to have been the very first roundabout in Ireland. Now, a roundabout, as you know, is a traffic circle. What term do we use down here? Roundabout? That's so welcome. What? It's so great not to have to translate this stuff. So, a roundabout, and this was and indeed is a roundabout at a place called Ballygawley in County Tyrone. And it's at the centre of this poem. I mention along the way the B specials. The B specials, as many of you will recall, they may be mentioned indeed in that wonderful exhibition, which I hope you'll be coming in to see, those of you who haven't seen it, over in the library. There's a timeline associated with Seamus Heaney's life, and they're no doubt mentioned there. They were the auxiliary division of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, who I think were sometimes known as the A Specials, and maybe just the A's. The B Specials, and I hope I'm not offending anyone here when I say that the B Specials specialised in more or less terrorising their neighbours. Usually they're Catholic neighbours, in fact almost exclusively they're Catholic neighbours, and that's where they come in here. They were banned banished and banned in the early 1970s. The sash my father wore, the great orange song, the Orange Order. The Pope, I'm sure you're familiar with the Pope. Yeah. Though, it's hard to know where you are with the Pope. Anyway, the sightseers. My father and mother, my brother and sister and I, with Uncle Pat, our dour, best-loved uncle, had set out that Sunday afternoon in July in his broken-down Ford, not to visit some graveyard. One died of shingles, one of fever, another's knees turned to jelly. But the brand new roundabout at Ballygolly, the first in mid-Ulster. Uncle Pat was telling us how the B specials had stopped him one night somewhere near Ballygolly and smashed his bicycle and made him sing the sash and curse the Pope of Rome. They held a pistol so hard against his forehead, there was still the mark of an O when he got home. So this next one's called Ned Skinner. Ned Skinner was a barbaric yop, if you took Aunt Sarah at her word. He would step over the mountain of a summer afternoon to dress a litter of pigs on my uncle's farm. Now, those of you, I know that there are a number of people here who are very interested in pigs, and the word the word dress is perhaps not used so much in these days. It means to what's the word I'm groping for? To emasculate, to geld. What am I thinking? To geld. Ned Skinner was a barbaric yop. If you took Aunt Sarah at her word, he would step over the mountain of a summer afternoon to dress a litter of pigs on my uncle's farm. Slightly speeded up version. Aunt Sarah would keep me in, taking me on her lap till it was over. Ned Skinner wiped his knife and rinsed his hands in the barrel at the doorstep. He winked and gripped my arm. It doesn't hurt, not so's you'd notice. And God never slams one door, but another is lying open. Them same pigs can see the wind. My uncle had given him 5 shillings. Ned Skinner came back while my uncle was in the fields. Sarah, he was calling, Sarah, you weren't so shy in our young day. You remember yon time in Archer's loft? His face blazed at the scullery window. Remember when the hay was won? Aunt Sarah had the door on the snib. That's no kind of talk to be coming over. Now go you home. Silence, then a wheeze. We heard the whiskey jug tinkle, his boots diminish in the yard. Aunt Sarah put on a fresh apron. So, how are we all doing there? One of my habits as a kid, and by the way, I'm going to move into adult life shortly, just in case you think I'm going to drag you through this year by year. But when I was a kid, one of the things I liked to do, I don't know if I liked to do, one of the things I did was to begin a sentence as we were sitting around in the parlor or whatever, living room. I would begin a sentence, and then and I think you can see that I'm interested in walking around. I would walk, and I would just disappear, and perhaps come back sometime later to finish the sentence, which was quite, they complained about it at the time. I think it was quite exasperating to the family. But in any case, this is part of the scenario, I suppose, of this poem, which is called The Turn. I mention in it a couple of things. The four feathers, the great the film version, I suppose. It's been made several times, as you know. A.E.W. Mason, Harry Faversham, and given these feathers, he's a card, and he, one by one, gives the four feathers back to the guy, his fellow officers, soldiers who accused him of cowardice. A lot of it's set in North Africa, with numbers of camels, war camels, furiously running around. And I remember seeing this thing on a Saturday night, and coming home from Mass the next morning and building a camel in the backyard. And that's part of what this poem is about. And the sands, the Sahara, two hotels at one point in Las Vegas. The Turn. In those days, when the sands might shift at any moment, when his mother might at any moment lay into him, he thought nothing of getting up halfway through a story about the Sahara, the one about the tribesmen following the scent of water to a waterhole. Thought nothing of getting up and going out while he was still halfway through a sentence, going out and taking a turn about the house, sometimes not bothering to return for an hour, 2 hours, a week, a year perhaps not until the sands of time had run out, not until his favorite guinea hen had brought herself to lay a double-yolked egg, or the double scent of the sandpile and the dunghill made a Sahara of the yard through which Ned Skinner had moaned, Sarah, Sarah. The yard in which, after seeing the four feathers, he'd taken it upon himself to turn a stack of pear boxes, still redolent of the scent of pears, into a bolster-humped camel that carried him across the endless sands to where Harry Feversham and himself lay in wait in a gully for the last of those out-and-out cowards and scoundrels. The yard in which he'd not only learned to spout most, if not all, of the main languages of the Sahara, but had such a grasp of the lay of the land, every twist and turn of the ergs and regs, which looked for all the world like featureless sands, had so mastered following the scent of water to a waterhole, shielding his eyes from the henhouse's fluorescent strip of light, under which he could make out a couple making out in a featureless room in the old sands, or a featureless room in the Sahara. A light by which he could make out every twist and turn in what would have seemed to a layperson a featureless hotel room. A room which offered him an instant replay on the old bolster and pear box scent rising from the camel under him. A scent powerful enough to turn him around, reminding him that he'd already been out for an hour, 2 hours, a week, a year perhaps. Having him turn back through the Sahara in which so many had perished, back through the sands on which lay the bones of thousands of his countrymen, through the sandpile that was not at all reminiscent of the Sahara, having him turn back inside to pick up his own sentence, to hear himself out. So, got a little theme going here. The camel. This is the camel section. And this is a poem, recent-ish poem from a new book. Which is called Dromedaries and Dung Beetles. Have you been reading about them? The dung beetles and the stars? Yes? One of the things they've discovered recently is that, quite recently, is that, of all the things that a dung beetle has to put up with, I'm sure that being the object of research is probably one of the last that it wants to be bothered with. But anyway, they were doing some research on the dung beetle, and I think they were putting something over one of its eyes to check various things. And what they were checking was the theory that the dung beetle might, like various other animals, insects, might indeed steer by the stars, take visual recognition, right? And guess what? You're not going to believe this, right? You're not going to believe this. They do. It's all true. Anyway, dromedaries and dung beetles. An eye-level fleck of straw in the mud wall is almost as good as gold. I've ventured into this piss-poor urinal partly to escape the wail of 30 milch camels with their colts as they're readied for our trek across the dunes. Partly because I've guzzled 3 glasses of the diuretic gunpowder tea the Tuareg hold in such esteem. They're mostly business casual attire, accented by a flamboyant blue or red nylon grab rope round their lower jaws. Dromedaries point to a 9-to-5 life of knees bent in the service of fetching carboys and carpetbags from A to B across the scarps. Think Boyne coracles bucking from wave to wave. Think scarab beetles rolling their strips of dung to a gab fest. These dromedary gargoyles are at once menacing and meek as, railing against their drivers' kicks and clicks, they fix their beautiful ugly mugs on their own meccas. The desert sky was so clear last night, the galaxies could be seen to pulse. The dromedaries were having a right old chinwag, each musing on its bolus. Every so often one would dispense some pills that turned out to be generic sheep or goat. The dung beetles set great store not by the bitter cud nor the often implausible histories of Herodotus, but the stars they use to guide themselves over the same sand dunes as these 30 milch camels and their colts. They too make a continuous line through Algeria and Tunisia. Dung beetles have been known to positively gamble on the outskirts of Zagora, a boom town where water finds it hard not to gush over the date palms. Despite the clouds of pumice above Marrakesh, even I might find my way to Kesh, in the ancient barony of Lurg, thanks to Cassiopeia and her self-regard. Think of how there lurks in almost all of us a weakness for the allegorical. Think of a Moroccan swallow's last gasp near the wattle and daub oppidum, where one of my kinsmen clips the manes of a groaning chariot team. Think of Private Henry Muldoon putting his stamp on the mud of Gallipoli on August 8th, 1915. It appears he worked as a miner at Hyam Colliery before serving in the Lancasters and the 8th Welsh Pioneers. His somewhat pronounced ears confirm his place in the family gallery. It's only a blink, my father used to say. Only a blink. I myself seem to have developed the gumption to stride manfully out of a neo-Napoleonic latrine and play my part in the March on Casablanca during the North African campaign. So, just a few more, if I may. Read a couple of poems about my children, if I may, and then we'll move towards a close, which I'm sure, yes, is always a good thing. So, let me read a little short poem, always a good thing. A poem called Red Knots. This has to do with my son, who's now 14. Red Knots. The day our son is due is the very day the red knots are meant to touch down on their long haul from Chile to the Arctic Circle, where they'll nest on the tundra within a few feet of where they were hatched. 40 or 50,000 of them are meant to drop in along Delaware Bay. They time their arrival on these shores to coincide with the horseshoe crabs laying their eggs in the sand. Smallish birds to begin with, the red knots have now lost half their weight. Eating the eggs of the horseshoe crabs is what gives them the strength to go on. 40 or 50,000 of them getting up all at once, as if for a rock concert encore. So this next one is called At Least They Weren't Speaking French. I could tell you where the title came from, but maybe later on. It's really irrelevant. But it's a poem, like many poems and songs, that has a little refrain. In this case, a nonsensical refrain. There are a couple of words in it that may not be immediately recognizable as they fly past your ear. One of them is the word flummery. Are you familiar with that? It's you know what? It's a dish which I think is not dissimilar from grits. I think it's somewhat like grits. It's also known as sowens. Sowens. Samhain, as you know, is the Celtic feast which we've hijacked, as it were, for Halloween, Samhain. And this was a dish that was eaten at that time. Samhain. Anyway, I think that's about it. At least they weren't speaking French. It's in 3 parts. 1, at least they weren't speaking French when my father sat with his brothers and sisters, 2 of each, on a ramshackle bench at the end of a lane marked by 2 white stones, and made mouth music as they waited, chilled to the bone, fol-de-rol, fol-de-rol, fol-de-rol-de-o, for the bus meant to bring their parents back from town. It came and went, nothing. One sister was weighed down by the youngest child, a grocery bag from a town more distant still in troth. What started as a cough, fol-de-rol, fol-de-rol, fol-de-rol-de-o, would briefly push them forward to some minor renown, then shove him back, oddly summary, down along the trench to that far-flung realm where, at least, they weren't speaking French. 2, at least they weren't speaking French when another brother, 20-something, stepped on a nail no one had bothered to clench in a plank thrown half-heartedly from the known to the unknown, fol-de-rol, fol-de-rol, fol-de-rol-de-o, across a drainage ditch on a building site. His nut-brown arm, his leg, nut-brown. That nail sheathed in a fine down would take no more than a week or 10 days to burgeon from the froth of that piddling little runoff, fol-de-rol, fol-de-rol, fol-de-rol-de-o, and make of him a green and burning tree. His septicemia crown, Samhain's as much as he could manage, trying to keep that flummery down as much as any of them could manage. However they might describe the stench as exhalation, as odor, at least they weren't speaking French. 3, at least they weren't speaking French when those 20-something council workers, one with a winch, the other a wrench, would point my son and me to a long, overgrown lane marked by 2 faded stones, fol-de-rol, fol-de-rol, fol-de-rol-de-o, like 2 white-faced clowns, gaping at the generations who passed between them and set down bag after grocery bag, setting them on the table. The newspaper tablecloth, 1976, not the East Tyrone Brigade, not Bader Meinhof, fol-de-rol, fol-de-rol, fol-de-rol-de-o, bringing the suggestion of a frown to those 2 mummer stones, still trying to lie low, trying to keep their mummery down to a bare minimum. 2 stones that, were they to speak, might blench as much at their own giving out as our taking in that at least they weren't speaking French. And just a couple more, I think. Read a little, pardon me, it's a little poem about my daughter who's now 21. And this is a little poem about her in the womb, a poem about a sonogram. Excuse me. And I mentioned spittle. Many of you will know spittle in the west of Ireland. Spittle. Spittle. Say it again. Spittle. Hospital, 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 workhouse, poorhouse. Spittle. Spittlefields. Spittle. The sonogram. Only a few weeks ago, the sonogram of Jane's womb resembled nothing so much as a satellite map of Ireland. Now the image is so well defined, we can make out not only a hand, but a thumb. On the road to Spiddle, a woman hitching a ride, a gladiator in his net, passing judgment on the crowd. You know, for years I've been hoping to sell the film rights to that poem. And I was very disappointed yesterday to go and see Pompeii, which is at a theatre really quite near you. And there's a lot of gladiatorial stuff in that film, so I'm not sure if it's going to work out for me. In any case, I'm going to end, if I may, with a poem called Cuba 2. Cuba 2, sort of bringing things around a little bit, somewhat. And before I read it, I just want to say what a delight it has been to be here for the last couple of days. Thank you very much for your wonderful, warm welcome. Obviously, and the opportunity to see this wonderful exhibition devoted to Seamus Heaney. The only downside of which being that it reminds us of the loss of Seamus. But anyway, something of him, a great deal of him, is to be found there. And if you haven't seen it, you should go and take a look at it. Anyway, and thank you very much indeed for coming out this afternoon. I really appreciate it. This is Cuba 2. I'm hanging with my daughter in downtown Havana. She's worried people think she's my mail order bride. Yeah. It might be the Anshaw tattooed on her ankle. It might be the tie-in with that poem of mine. The 59 Buicks, the 59 Chevys, the 59 Studebakers with their white-walled wheels. The rain-bleached streets have been put through a mangle. The sugar mills, too, are feeling the squeeze. We touch on how Ireland will be inundated long before the 0-0 draw. Che Guevara's father was one of the Galway lynches. Or was that his mother? I never remember. Now a genetically engineered catfish can crawl on its belly like an old school gorilla. Maybe a diminished seventh isn't the note a half-decent revolution should end on. The poor with their hands out for pencils and soap. Hopped up though I am on caffeine, I've suffered all my life from post-traumatic fatigue. Even a world-class sleeper like Rip Van Winkle was out of it for only 20 years. A fillet of the fenny cobra may yet fold into a blood pressure drug. A passion for marijuana may yet be nipped in the bud. Some are here for a nose job, some a torn meniscus. The profits from health tourism have been salted away. The blue scorpion takes the sting from one cancer. Ovarian may yet leave us unfazed. Hemingway's sun hat is woven from raffia. He's tried everything to stop the rot. He's cut everything back to the bare essentials. His 55 Chryslers in the shop. We'll sit with Hemingway through yet another evening of trying to stay off the rum. I'm running down the list of my uncles. It was Uncle Pat who was marked by a gun. Our friends Mayor Lansky and the Jewish Mafia built the Riviera as a gambling club. Had it not been for the time differential, Uncle Arnie might have taken a cut. Uncle Arnie's Arnie Rothstein. Arnold Rothstein is one of my extended family members. The best baseball bats are turned from hibiscus. They're good against people who get in your way. The best poems, meanwhile, give the answers to questions only they have raised. We touch on Bulat and Evgeny, two Russian friends who've since left town. The Cuban ground iguana is actually quite thin on the ground. The cigars we lit up on President's Avenue have won gold medals in the cigar games. Now it seems a cigar may twinkle all the more as the light fails. My daughters led me through Hemingway's villa to a desk round which dusk drinkers crowd. She insists the anshaw on her Achilles tendon represents her being in the here and now. The cattle egret is especially elated that a plough may still be yoked to an ox. Others sigh for the era of 3 martini lunches and the Martini Henry single shot. When will we give Rothstein and Lansky and their heavies the collective heave? In Ireland, we need to start now to untangle the rhetoric of 2016. The Riviera's pool is shaped like a coffin. So much has been submerged here since the Bay of Pigs. Maybe that's why the buildings are wrinkled. Maybe that's why the cars have fins. Thank you.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.